The Galactic Conclave had existed for 9 million years. Its gleaming crystalline chambers had witnessed the rise and fall of over 12,000 civilizations, the birth and death of countless stars, and the careful orchestration of peace across 17 spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. In all that time, only 3 species had ever been deemed too dangerous for integration. Today, humanity would become the 4th. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone in the center of the judgment chamber, her dress uniform crisp despite the 37 hours she'd been kept waiting without rest, food, or water. Around her, rising in concentric tiers that seemed to stretch into infinity, sat the representatives of 842 member species of the Galactic Conclave. She could feel their eyes upon her. Compound eyes, singular orbs of bioluminescent tissue, sensory stalks that tasted the electromagnetic spectrum, and organs she couldn't begin to identify. All of them watching, all of them judging. The High Arbiter, a massive being that resembled an amalgamation of crystalline structures and floating geometric shapes, pulsed with cold blue light as it prepared to speak. The Velkari were the oldest species still active in the conclave, their bodies having long ago transcended organic matter in favor of living mathematics made manifest. Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Collective. The Arbiter's voice resonated directly in her mind, translated perfectly into English by means she couldn't comprehend. You have been brought before this assembly to answer for the crimes of your species. Elena kept her face neutral. With respect, High Arbiter, we have committed no crimes. We've done nothing but defend ourselves. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembly. The clicking of mandibles, the shifting of massive bodies, the flashing of chromatophores. The Arbiter pulsed brighter. Defense is a matter of perspective, Ambassador. Your species has been under observation for 217 of your years. In that time, we have compiled extensive documentation of your nature. The chamber darkened, and holographic images began to materialize around Elena. She recognized them immediately, scenes from human history playing out in horrifying clarity. The trenches of World War I, bodies stacked like cordwood. The atomic fires over Hiroshima, shadows burned into stone. The killing fields of Cambodia, mass graves stretching to the horizon. Rwanda, Bosnia, the corporate wars of the late 21st century, the Mars Rebellion and its brutal suppression. Elena had studied these events. Every human diplomat had. But seeing them projected here, in this alien court, stripped of context and presented as evidence of humanity's inherent evil, it was almost too much to bear. You are a species defined by violence, the Arbiter continued. You have developed weapons capable of extinguishing all life on your world, not once, but dozens of times over. You have used these weapons against your own kind. You wage war for resources, for ideology, for nothing more than the color of one's skin or the name by which one addresses the divine. Elena wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that humanity had also produced Mozart and Shakespeare, that they had built hospitals and founded charities, that they had reached for the stars not to conquer but to explore. But she had been briefed on conclave protocols. Speaking out of turn would only make things worse. Furthermore, the Arbiter continued, your expansion into space has demonstrated a troubling disregard for established boundaries. In the 43 years since your species achieved faster-than-light travel, you have colonized 117 worlds, many of which were within territories claimed by Conclave members. Now that, Elena thought, was patently unfair. Those worlds had been uninhabited, unclaimed by any active civilization. But to the Conclave, territorial claims could extend for millennia, even if a species never actually used the space in question. Your technology is crude but effective, the Arbiter noted. Your weapons, while primitive, are devastating in their application. And your population. The being paused, its geometric form shifting slightly. Your population growth defies all conventional biological modeling. You breed like a virus, consuming resources and expanding without limit. Elena clenched her jaw. She had been warned about this too, the fear that the Conclave species had of humanity's reproductive capabilities. Most galactic species reproduced slowly, their populations stable over millions of years. Humanity had gone from 8 billion to 40 billion in just over a century, and their colonial populations were growing even faster. In light of these findings, the Arbiter continued, the Conclave has deliberated for 17 of your years. We have consulted the predictive arrays of the Morath Collective. We have analyzed probability matrices spanning 10,000 possible futures. And in 94.7% of all scenarios, the continued existence of humanity leads to catastrophic outcomes for the galaxy. The chamber fell silent. Elena felt her heart hammering in her chest. Therefore, by unanimous decision of the Galactic Conclave, humanity is hereby declared too dangerous for integration into galactic civilization. Elena had expected this. The writing had been on the wall for years, but hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow. You will be given 90 of your days to consolidate your population on your homeworld and its moon. All colonial holdings will be evacuated. All spacecraft beyond your stellar system will be recalled. After this period, a containment barrier will be erected around your system. You will be quarantined indefinitely, until such time as your species demonstrates the capacity for peaceful coexistence. And if we refuse? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The Arbiter pulsed with what might have been amusement. Then the Conclave will be forced to pursue more permanent solutions. The meaning was clear. Submit to quarantine or face extinction. Elena looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species who had just condemned her people to imprisonment. Some looked satisfied. Others appeared uncomfortable. A few, a precious few, seemed genuinely troubled by what was happening. But none of them spoke up. I need to communicate with my government, Elena said. This decision will require... There will be no communication, the Arbiter interrupted. The decision has been made. Your government has already been informed through other channels. You will remain here as a guest until the transition period has concluded. In other words, Elena realized she was a hostage. The proceedings are concluded, the Arbiter announced. May the wisdom of ages guide us all. The assembly began to disperse, massive beings shuffling toward exits, smaller creatures taking to the air or slithering away through passages designed for their unique anatomies. Elena stood alone in the center of the chamber, her mind racing. 90 days. That's all humanity had. But as the guards approached to escort her to her quarters, Elena noticed something strange. Her earpiece, a standard diplomatic communication device, was buzzing softly. The Conclave's jamming fields should have rendered it inoperable. She pressed it deeper into her ear, pretending to scratch an itch. "Angel, this is Prometheus. Package is hot. Repeat, package is hot. Initiate Protocol Omega on your mark. We are standing by." Elena felt a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The Conclave had been watching humanity for 200 years. They had catalogued every war, every weapon, every dark moment in human history. But they had missed something. They had missed the fact that humanity had been watching them too. Chapter 2: The Silent Preparations. 17 years earlier, when the Conclave had first announced its investigation into humanity's worthiness for galactic citizenship, Admiral James Chen had gathered his most trusted officers in a bunker 3 kilometers beneath the Martian surface. "They're going to reject us," he had said without preamble. "I don't know when, I don't know how, but I've read every report, analyzed every interaction, and I'm telling you, the Conclave is afraid of us." Captain Sarah Okonjo had leaned forward, her cybernetic eyes gleaming in the low light. "With respect, Admiral, how can you be certain? The Conclave has accepted species far more aggressive than us. The Kreth literally eat their young." "The Kreth are predictable," Chen had replied. "They follow instincts that can be modeled, manipulated, controlled. We don't. We're the only species in the known galaxy that regularly acts against our own self-interest, that makes decisions based on abstract concepts like honor and justice and spite. We're the only species that has ever, in the entire history of galactic observation, developed the capacity for nuclear weapons and then chosen not to use them to their fullest extent." "I would think that would work in our favor," Okonjo had said. "It terrifies them," Chen had countered, "because it means they can't predict us, and what they can't predict, they can't control." The meeting had continued for 7 hours. By its conclusion, they had drafted the initial framework for what would become humanity's greatest secret, Project Prometheus. For 17 years, while the Conclave debated and deliberated, humanity had prepared. Not for integration, for war. The project had required the coordinated efforts of every human government, every major corporation, every military and intelligence agency across Earth and her colonies. It had required levels of secrecy that would have been unthinkable in any previous era. It had required sacrifices that the public would never know about. But most importantly, it had required understanding the enemy. The Conclave's greatest advantage was their age. Their member species had been traveling the stars for millions of years. Their technology was advanced beyond human comprehension. Their fleets numbered in the billions. But age, as humanity well knew, could also be a weakness. The Conclave species had not fought a real war in over 3 million years. Their conflicts were resolved through economic pressure, political maneuvering, and the occasional surgical strike. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that would not negotiate, would not surrender, would not stop. They had forgotten what it meant to face humans. Project Prometheus had 3 phases. The first had been intelligence gathering, learning everything possible about Conclave technology, military capabilities, and political structures. Human spies, disguised through advanced gene therapy and cybernetic modification, had infiltrated dozens of alien societies. Human hackers had spent years worming their way into alien networks, learning their languages of code, their protocols, their vulnerabilities. The second phase had been technological development. Not to match the Conclave, that would have been impossible, but to exploit their weaknesses.
Humanity couldn't build a ship that matched a Valkyrie dreadnought, but they could build a missile that could pierce its shields. They couldn't create an AI as sophisticated as the Morath Collective's predictive arrays, but they could create viruses that could corrupt them. The third phase had been the hardest: positioning, getting assets in place without detection, hiding weapons in plain sight, preparing for a war that everyone prayed would never come. Now, as Elena Vasquez stood in the judgment chamber with the weight of humanity's fate on her shoulders, those preparations were about to be tested. Chapter 3: Seconds. The guards that approached Elena were thoraxians, insectoid beings standing 3 meters tall, their carapaces gleaming with embedded sensors and weapon systems. They were the Conclave's primary enforcement species, renowned for their discipline and their complete lack of individual thought. Each thoraxian was connected to a hive mind, their actions coordinated by a central intelligence that valued efficiency above all else.
"You will come with us," the lead thoraxian clicked, its mandibles translating the sound into Elena's neural implant.
"Of course," Elena said, raising her hands in a gesture of compliance. "I have no wish to cause trouble."
As she moved toward the guards, her finger brushed against a small stud on the inside of her ring. Standard diplomatic jewelry, cleared through 17 separate security scans. None of those scans had detected the quantum-entangled transmitter hidden within, because none of the Conclave's technology could detect something that, according to their understanding of physics, shouldn't exist. The transmission was instantaneous. Across 17,000 light-years, on a station hidden in the accretion disk of a black hole that the Conclave didn't even know existed, a signal was received. And everything changed. The first indication that something was wrong came from the judgment chamber's lighting. It flickered just once, just for a fraction of a second, but in a chamber that had operated flawlessly for 9 million years, even that brief interruption was unprecedented. The High Arbiter paused in its departure, its geometric form spinning faster. What? The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Elena dropped to the floor, reaching for the emergency kit hidden in her diplomatic sash. Her hands found the familiar shape of night vision contacts, and she pressed them against her eyes just as the screaming started. The thoraxian guards were firing blindly, their weapons sending beams of coherent light slashing through the darkness. But they weren't hitting anything. Their targeting systems, dependent on the chamber's sensor grid, had gone completely dark. Elena rolled behind a structural column, her heart pounding. This was moving faster than expected. The plan had called for a gradual escalation, a series of disruptions that would buy time for the larger operation. But someone had decided to accelerate the timeline. She could guess why. The chamber's emergency lighting kicked in, a dim red glow that barely illuminated the vast space. Elena could see the delegates scrambling for exits, their various anatomies creating a chaotic mass of limbs and appendages. The High Arbiter was pulsing frantically, its form shifting through colors that Elena's eyes could barely perceive. "What is happening?" The Arbiter's voice thundered in her mind. "Report! Report!" But there was no one to report. The chamber's communication systems were down. Its AI assistants were offline. For the first time in 9 million years, the Judgment Chamber was completely cut off from the rest of the Conclave. And that's when the first ship arrived. Elena felt it before she saw it, a vibration in her bones, a pressure in her sinuses that built to an almost unbearable intensity before suddenly releasing. Through the chamber's transparent ceiling, she could see it, a vessel unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Conclave's ships were elegant, their designs refined over millions of years into forms of perfect efficiency. They flowed through space like living things, their curves and angles optimized for every conceivable purpose. The human ship was different. It was ugly, brutal, a mass of angles and protrusions that seemed almost random, like a weapon designed by a madman. It bristled with gun emplacements and missile batteries, its hull scarred and pitted by what looked like combat damage. But most disturbingly, it was enormous. A full kilometer longer than the largest conclave vessel, it hung in space above the chamber like a promise of violence. And it was just the first. As Elena watched, more ships appeared. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They emerged from folded space in cascading waves, each arrival accompanied by that same bone-deep vibration. Within seconds, the sky above the Judgment Chamber was filled with human warships. The first fleet of the Terran Navy had arrived. And it had arrived in the heart of the Galactic Conclave itself. Chapter 4: The Impossible Breach. In the Conclave's Central Command Center, Supreme Coordinator Velkex Prime struggled to comprehend what its sensors were telling it. The human fleet had appeared inside the Conclave's most heavily defended space, past the defensive networks that could detect a ship from 5 light-years away, past the weapons platforms that could destroy a sun, past the shields that had never been breached in 9 million years. And they had done it in seconds. How? Velkex Prime demanded, its crystalline form flickering with distress signals that its subordinates had never seen before. How is this possible? The Marath analyst beside it, a being of pure energy contained within a spherical housing, rippled with uncertainty. Our models show no possible path. The probability of this occurring was calculated at 0. 0. The predictive matrices are in complete disharmony. Your models were wrong, Velkex Prime snapped. Obviously they were wrong. Now find me a way to destroy that fleet. But as the coordinator turned its attention to the tactical displays, it realized that destruction might not be so simple. The human ships were moving with a coordination that should have been impossible for beings who lacked true hive consciousness. They had spread into a formation that covered the Conclave's command station from every angle, their weapons tracking but not firing. And then, a transmission cut through every channel, military, civilian, emergency, and encrypted alike. This is Admiral James Chen of the Terran Navy, addressing the Galactic Conclave. Velkex Prime watched as a holographic image appeared in the command center. A human male, older, his face lined with age, but his eyes sharp and clear. He wore a uniform of deep blue, and behind him, more humans moved with purposeful efficiency. 47 minutes ago, your assembly declared humanity too dangerous for galactic civilization and ordered our containment or destruction. I'm here to demonstrate that you were absolutely correct. The humans in the command center with the Admiral laughed, a sound that the Marath analyst found deeply disturbing. How could they laugh at a time like this? We have achieved multiple simultaneous breaches of your defensive networks, Chen continued. As we speak, our vessels are taking up positions around every major conclave installation in this sector. We have disabled your primary communication arrays, your jump interdiction fields, and your automated defense platforms. We have complete tactical superiority. Velkex Prime checked its readouts. Every word the human said was true. You have 10 of your minutes to transmit unconditional surrender terms.
If we do not receive them, we will begin the systematic dismantling of your military infrastructure. We will continue until you comply or until there is nothing left to dismantle. Chen, out." The transmission ended. The command center was silent. Then Velkex Prime began to laugh, or rather, to produce the crystalline harmonics that served as laughter for its species. "The human thinks to threaten us?" it said. "The Conclave has 800 billion ships. The humans have, what, a few thousand? They have revealed themselves, and now they will be destroyed." The coordinator began issuing orders, calling in fleets from across the galaxy. It would take time. The Conclave's communication networks were damaged, and ships would have to travel through normal space until they could find working jump points. But eventually, overwhelming force would arrive. The humans had bought themselves a few hours, perhaps a few days. It wouldn't matter. But as Velkex Prime coordinated the response, it failed to notice several things. It failed to notice that the human ships were not maintaining their positions. They were slowly spreading out, seeding small devices throughout the surrounding space. It failed to notice that its own subordinates, beings who had served loyally for centuries, were receiving encrypted transmissions that bypassed all standard security. And it failed to notice that the Marath analyst had gone very, very quiet. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had been moved from the judgment chamber to a holding cell within the Conclave's central station. Her guards, 4 Thoraxians and 2 of the crystalline Velkari, had been notably silent, their usual efficiency disrupted by the chaos unfolding around them. The cell was comfortable enough, designed for the temporary holding of diplomatic guests rather than prisoners. It had a soft bed, a replicator that could produce basic human food, and a window that looked out into space. Through that window, Elena watched the human fleet. She had known that Project Prometheus existed. She had known, in general terms, what it entailed. But seeing it in action, seeing thousands of human warships positioned around the heart of galactic civilization, was something else entirely. Her earpiece crackled. "Ambassador Vasquez, this is Admiral Chen. Can you confirm your status?" Elena pressed the device deeper into her ear, speaking softly. "I'm alive and unharmed, Admiral. Currently detained in a holding cell on the central station. 4 Thoraxian guards, 2 Valkyrie. They don't seem to know what to do with me." "Understood. We're tracking your location. Extraction team is standing by, but we're going to need you to stay put for a little while longer." "What's happening out there, Admiral? This wasn't the plan. We were supposed to have more time." There was a pause before Chen responded. "Plans change, Ambassador. When we received confirmation that the Conclave had voted for extermination rather than containment, we had to accelerate. They weren't planning to let any humans survive, including you." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Extermination? The Arbiter said quarantine. "The Arbiter lied. We intercepted their internal communications. The containment barrier was actually a stellar compression array. They were going to collapse Sol into a black hole, taking Earth and everything within 50 light-years with it." Elena closed her eyes. 40 billion people. The entire human race. Gone in an instant. "So we moved up the timeline," Chen continued. "We couldn't let them activate that array." "Did we? Did we stop it?" "The array has been neutralized," Chen confirmed, along with 7 other last-resort weapon systems that the Conclave had positioned around human space.
They really wanted to make sure, Ambassador. They were terrified of us.
Elena opened her eyes, looking out at the fleet.
And now?
Now we showed them that they were right to be afraid.
The transmission cut off, and Elena was left alone with her thoughts. She had spent her entire career trying to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. She had genuinely believed, that coexistence was possible. That if humanity just demonstrated enough goodwill, enough patience, enough willingness to adapt, they would be accepted. But the Conclave had never intended to accept them. From the very beginning, they had been looking for an excuse to destroy the dangerous upstarts from Earth. And humanity had known. The door to her cell slid open, and Elena turned to find a familiar face. "Dr. Kimathi," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "What are you doing here?" Dr. Joseph Kimathi was the Conclave's foremost expert on human biology, a Kenyan-born scientist who had been working with various alien species for over 30 years. He had been one of humanity's strongest advocates within the Conclave, consistently arguing for integration rather than isolation. Or so Elena had believed. "Ambassador," Kimathi said, stepping into the cell. The guards made no move to stop him. They seemed frozen, their eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, unfocused and still. "We don't have much time. The next phase is about to begin, and I need to brief you on your role." Elena stared at him. "Your role? Joseph, what is—" "I'm not a scientist, Ambassador," Kimathi interrupted, his accent shifting subtly, becoming harder, more precise. "Or rather, I am, but that's not my primary function. My name is Colonel Joseph Kimathi, and I'm the commander of Operation Trojan Horse." He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed it against the wall. A holographic display appeared, showing a map of the Conclave's central station. "For 32 years, I have been cultivating assets within the Conclave's hierarchy," Kimathi explained. "Scientists, administrators, low-level functionaries, beings who were dissatisfied with the status quo, who believed that the galaxy needed to change. I have identified 4,752 potential allies across 127 species." Elena shook her head slowly. 32 years? But Project Prometheus only— "Project Prometheus was the military component," Kimathi interrupted. "But General Chen knew from the beginning that ships and weapons wouldn't be enough. We needed allies. We needed intelligence. We needed to understand our enemy in ways that surveillance could never achieve. So we created a parallel program, Trojan Horse, and we recruited the best deep-cover operatives humanity had ever produced." "You've been lying to me for 20 years, Elena said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "I've been protecting you for 20 years, Kimathi corrected gently. "Your sincerity was our greatest asset. If you had known about Prometheus, about Trojan Horse, you wouldn't have been able to play your part so convincingly. The Conclave would have sensed deception, and all of our plans would have unraveled." Elena wanted to be angry. Part of her was angry, but a larger part understood. She had been a pawn, yes, but a necessary one. Her genuine efforts at diplomacy had provided cover for humanity's true preparations. "So what happens now?" she asked. Kimathi smiled. "Now, Ambassador, we give you a new role to play. You're going to address the Galactic Conclave, what's left of it, and you're going to offer them a choice." "What choice?" "The same choice they offered us, submission or destruction." He paused. "But unlike them, we're actually going to mean the first option." Chapter 6: The Reckoning.
Admiral James Chen stood on the bridge of the TN Indomitable, the flagship of the First Fleet, and watched the chaos unfold around him.
The Conclave's response had been predictable. Within minutes of his ultimatum, they had begun rallying their forces, calling in ships from across the sector. The initial counterattack had been fierce, hundreds of Conclave vessels converging on the human positions from multiple vectors. And they had all failed.
"Commodore Reyes, status report," Chen said calmly.
From the secondary display, Commodore Maria Reyes's face appeared. Her ship, the TN Defiance, was holding position near what had been the Conclave's primary shipyard. Shipyard neutralized, Admiral. 742 vessels destroyed while still in dock. Minimal damage to civilian infrastructure, as ordered.
"Admiral Chen," another voice cut in. "Captain Yuki Tanaka of the TN Vengeance. Third wave of Conclave reinforcements incoming. Estimate 200,000 vessels."
200,000. Chen almost smiled. The Conclave was throwing everything they had at the human fleet.
It wouldn't be enough.
"Activate the cascade," Chen ordered. Throughout the human formation, small devices that had been seeded during the initial deployment began to pulse with energy. They were called quantum resonance disruptors, QRDs, and they were perhaps the crowning achievement of Project Prometheus. The Conclave's technology was based on principles of quantum coherence. Their shields, their weapons, their communications, all of it relied on maintaining precise quantum states across vast distances. It was elegant, sophisticated, and nearly impossible to counter through conventional means. But humanity hadn't used conventional means. The QRDs didn't try to overpower the Conclave's technology. Instead, they introduced microscopic uncertainties into the quantum fabric of local space. Not enough to affect human systems, which were deliberately designed with higher tolerance for quantum noise, but absolutely devastating for Conclave technology.
200,000 ships dropped out of formations simultaneously. Their shields flickered and died. Their weapons went offline. Their navigation systems began reporting impossible coordinates.
And then the human fleet opened fire. Chen had not wanted this. He had spent 40 years preparing for this war, hoping that it would never come. He had studied the Conclave's history, learned about the civilizations they had absorbed and the ones they had destroyed. He had come to understand them not as monsters, but as beings who had simply forgotten what it meant to face an equal. But when the choice was extinction or victory, there was only one answer. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet is in complete disarray. Estimated casualties, 97% disabled or destroyed. Orders?" Chen closed his eyes briefly. 97%. Nearly 200,000 ships, millions of crew members. "Ceasefire," he said. "Target only vessels that continue hostile action. Begin broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies." The bridge fell silent as the magnitude of what had just happened sank in. In less than 10 minutes, humanity had destroyed the largest military force the Conclave had ever assembled in a single engagement. The galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 7. The Message. Supreme Coordinator Velkex Prime stared at the tactical display, its crystalline form cycling through colors that had no names in any language, emotional states so far beyond its normal experience that it couldn't even categorize them. Its fleet was gone. Not defeated. Not retreated. Gone. 200,000 ships, the pride of the Conclave's military, reduced to drifting wreckage in a matter of minutes. "How?" it whispered, the question that had been repeating in its mind since the humans first appeared. "How is this possible?" "Because you underestimated us," a voice said. Velkex Prime spun to find a human standing in its command center. A woman, small by the standards of her species, wearing what appeared to be civilian clothes rather than a military uniform. She stood calmly among the panicking Conclave officers, as if she had every right to be there.
How did you... the security fields?
Your security is compromised, the woman said simply. It has been for years. My name is Colonel Sarah Okonjo, and I'm here to deliver a message.
Velkex Prime tried to signal its guards, but none responded. Looking around, it realized that many of its officers had stopped moving entirely, their eyes fixed on displays that showed them things they couldn't comprehend.
What have you done to them? Velkex Prime demanded. Nothing permanent, Okonjo replied. Your species thinks through quantum-linked networks. Disrupt the quantum links and you become disconnected. They'll recover in a few hours. The coordinator felt something it had never experienced before. Genuine fear. Not for the Conclave, not for its civilization, but for itself. For the first time in its 3 million years of existence, Velkex Prime understood that it might actually die. What do you want? It asked. Okonjo smiled, a human expression that Velkex Prime had never been able to interpret correctly. 17 years ago, your assembly began deliberations on whether humanity should be allowed to join galactic civilization. You examined our history, our culture, our technology. You analyzed us from every conceivable angle. We were thorough, Velkex Prime agreed, unsure where this was going. You were blind, Okonjo corrected. You looked at our wars and saw only violence. You didn't see what those wars taught us. You looked at our weapons and saw only destruction. You didn't see the ingenuity that created them. You looked at our divisions and saw weakness. You didn't see that our greatest strength comes from our diversity, from our ability to disagree, to argue, to challenge each other and grow stronger for it. She took a step closer, and Velkex Prime found itself retreating, a reflex it hadn't employed in millennia. You saw that we had developed nuclear weapons and chosen not to use them to their fullest extent, and you thought that made us unpredictable. You were right. But you interpreted that unpredictability as a threat. You didn't consider that it might also be a virtue, that a species capable of staying its hand, of choosing mercy when destruction was easier, might be exactly what this galaxy needs. We have maintained peace for 9 million years, Velkex Prime protested weakly. You have maintained stagnation for 9 million years, Okonjo countered. How many species have you contained in that time? How many civilizations have you destroyed because they didn't fit your models? You haven't preserved peace. You've eliminated anything that might challenge your control. We had no choice. The galaxy is vast and without order. Without order, species might actually evolve. They might change. They might surprise you. Okonjo's smile faded. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're not afraid of our weapons or our violence. You're afraid that we might be right, that your way of doing things isn't the only way, that the galaxy might be better with species like us in it. Velkex Prime wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep in its crystalline core, it recognized the truth in the human's words. The Conclave had always justified its actions as necessary for galactic stability. But perhaps stability wasn't the ultimate goal. Perhaps growth, change, and even a little chaos were just as important. What will you do now? Velkex Prime asked.
Will you destroy us? Take revenge for our attempted genocide."
Okonjo was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a holographic projector. She activated it, and an image appeared between them.
It showed Admiral Chen on the bridge of his ship. Behind him, the display showed the Conclave's central station, unharmed. The civilian districts, the residential areas, the cultural archives, all intact.
"We have complete military superiority," Chen's recorded message said. "We could destroy every Conclave installation in this sector. We could pursue your fleets to the corners of the galaxy. We could do to you exactly what you planned to do to us."
Velkex Prime waited for the threat.
"But we won't," Chen continued. "Not because we're weak, not because we're afraid, but because we're human. And being human means understanding that today's enemy can be tomorrow's friend. That mercy isn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. That the greatest victory isn't the destruction of your opponent, but their transformation into an ally." The image of Chen leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The Galactic Conclave declared humanity too dangerous for galactic civilization. You were right. We are dangerous. Dangerous to tyranny, dangerous to stagnation. Dangerous to anyone who believes that the strong have the right to eliminate the weak simply because they're afraid. But we're also dangerous to ourselves. We know our flaws better than you ever could. We've spent our entire history struggling against our worst impulses, learning, slowly, painfully, how to be better. And that struggle, that constant effort to overcome our own darkness, is what makes us strong. So here is our offer. Not submission, not destruction, but partnership. We will share what we've learned about technology, about ourselves, about the universe. We will help you break free of the stagnation that has held you captive for millions of years. And in return, you will accept us as equals, not as subjects, not as threats, but as partners in building a better galaxy." The recording paused, and Chen's expression softened slightly. "You have 1 hour to respond. If you choose partnership, we begin a new era in galactic history. If you choose continued hostility, we will defend ourselves. And I promise you, the Conclave will not survive the experience. The choice is yours." The hologram faded, and Okonjo deactivated the projector. "1 hour," she said. "I suggest you choose wisely." Then she turned and walked out of the command center, leaving Velkex Prime alone with the weight of 9 million years of history and a decision that would shape the next 9 million. Chapter 8: The Council of Shadows. While Admiral Chen's ultimatum played across the Conclave's networks, a different kind of meeting was taking place in the deepest levels of the central station. In a chamber that didn't appear on any official schematic, 12 beings gathered around a table that had witnessed the secret decisions of galactic history for longer than most species had existed. They were the architects, the true power behind the Conclave. Not the elected representatives who sat in the assembly, not the coordinators who managed daily operations, but the hidden council that had guided galactic civilization since before the current cosmic era. They had no names that younger species would recognize. They had no forms that could be easily perceived. They were ancient beyond comprehension, their origins lost in the depths of time that even their own memories couldn't penetrate. And they were very, very angry. "We underestimated them," the first architect said, its voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. This was not supposed to be possible.
The probability matrices gave us clear guidance, the third architect responded. Its form a constantly shifting cloud of potential energy. 94.7% certainty of successful containment. The humans should not have been able to develop this technology. Their understanding of quantum mechanics was too primitive.
Obviously, their understanding was not as primitive as we believed, the seventh architect interjected. They deceived us. They deliberately concealed their capabilities.
As we would have done in their position, the first acknowledged, perhaps we should have recognized that. Silence fell over the gathering. The architects rarely admitted mistakes. Their self-image as the infallible guides of galactic civilization didn't allow for error. But the evidence was undeniable. They had miscalculated, and now they faced a choice they had never anticipated.
We could still destroy them, the fifth architect suggested. Activate the deep reserves. Call upon the ancient weapons. There are forces at our disposal that even the humans cannot counter. And destroy half the galaxy in the process, the ninth architect countered. The weapons you speak of were sealed for a reason. Using them would cause more harm than the humans ever could. Then what do you propose? The fifth demanded. Accept their offer? Allow them to integrate into galactic society? They will change everything. The stability we have maintained for eons will collapse. Perhaps, the first architect said slowly, that is not entirely undesirable. The other architects turned their attention to the first, shocked by its words. You cannot be serious? The third said. We are the guardians of order. We have preserved this galaxy through 13 extinction-level events. We have guided countless species from barbarism to enlightenment. We cannot simply allow. Allow what? The first interrupted. Change? Evolution? The very processes that gave rise to intelligence in the first place? It paused, its ancient form shifting in what might have been contemplation. I have been thinking about what the human kernel said, about stagnation, about our fear of the unpredictable. She was attempting to manipulate us, the third insisted. She was speaking the truth, the first countered. I have reviewed the records. In the last 3 million years, no new species has successfully challenged our assumptions. No new ideas have emerged that we didn't anticipate. No new technologies have been developed that we didn't already know were possible. We have created a galaxy that is safe, stable, and utterly static. That is the point, the fifth said. Safety, stability, the prevention of catastrophe. And the prevention of growth, the first replied. The prevention of change. The prevention of everything that makes existence meaningful. We have become so focused on avoiding the worst outcomes that we have also avoided the best ones. The architects were silent, processing this unprecedented argument from their leader. Consider, the first continued, what the humans have accomplished in a mere 200,000 years. From their emergence as a distinct species to their current level of technology, a journey that took most species millions of years, they completed in a fraction of the time. And they did it while constantly fighting among themselves, dividing their resources, making every possible mistake. That is precisely why they're dangerous, the third argued. That is precisely why they're valuable, the first countered. They are everything we have tried to eliminate from the galaxy. Chaotic, unpredictable, violent, irrational.
And yet, they have achieved things that should have been impossible. They have grown in ways that our models could not anticipate. They have demonstrated that our way is not the only way.
You're suggesting we actually accept their offer? The seventh asked, incredulous. The first was quiet for a long moment. I am suggesting that we consider it. For the first time in millions of years, we have encountered a species that we cannot control. A species that has the power to destroy us if they choose. A species that has chosen, instead, to offer us partnership.
It could be a trap, the fifth said. It could be, the first agreed. But I have analyzed the humans' proposal. I have reviewed their history, their psychology, their patterns of behavior, and I believe they are sincere. Not because they are naive, they are anything but naive, but because they genuinely believe that partnership is better than domination, that today's enemy can be tomorrow's friend.
And if you're wrong? The third asked.
The first's form shifted, taking on configurations that the other architects had never seen before. Then we adapt, we learn, we change, just as the humans have done throughout their history. Perhaps it's time we remembered how to do the same. The vote that followed was the closest in the history of the architects. 7-5. In favor of acceptance. Elena Vasquez stood in the conclave's ground assembly hall, looking out at the thousands of delegates who had gathered to hear humanity's formal response to the day's events. She was exhausted. The last 48 hours had been the most intense of her life, from the judgment chamber to the holding cell, from the revelation of Project Prometheus to the long hours of negotiation that had followed. She had slept perhaps 3 hours total, and those had been interrupted by constant communications from every faction that had a stake in the outcome. But she had refused to let anyone else deliver this speech. This was her duty, not as an operative or a pawn, but as the ambassador of the human race.
12 hours ago, she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber, this assembly declared humanity too dangerous for galactic civilization. You were right.
A murmur passed through the gathered delegates. This was not what they had expected.
We are dangerous, Elena continued. We are violent, unpredictable, and often irrational. We have committed atrocities against each other that would horrify any of the species assembled here. We have developed weapons capable of destroying worlds, and we have used them against our own kind.
She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in.
But you were also wrong, because you saw our violence and failed to see our courage. You saw our aggression and failed to see our compassion. You saw our capacity for destruction and failed to see our capacity for creation.
Elena gestured to the holographic display that materialized behind her, showing images that the conclave had never seen, not because they were hidden, but because they had never thought to look.
The liberation of the concentration camps. Soldiers weeping as they carried starving children to safety. The reconstruction of Europe after World War II. Former enemies working together to rebuild what they had destroyed. The first responders of 1,000 disasters, fires, earthquakes, floods, risking their lives to save complete strangers. The volunteers who traveled across the world to fight diseases in impoverished regions. The scientists who shared their discoveries freely for the benefit of all. The activists who stood against injustice even when it cost them everything.
This is humanity, Elena said. Not just our wars, but our peace. Not just our hatred, but our love. Not just our worst moments, but our best ones.
She turned to face the assembly directly, her eyes moving from delegate to delegate.
12 hours ago, you planned to destroy us, to collapse our sun, and erase every trace of human existence from the universe. You did this because you were afraid. Afraid of what we might become. Afraid of what we might do. And perhaps you had reason to be afraid. We have certainly given you cause. But now the situation has changed. You have seen what we can do when we're threatened. You have witnessed the power we have developed, the technology we have created, the strategy we have executed. You know that we could have destroyed you, could still destroy you if we chose. And yet, we are not here for revenge. We are not here to conquer or to dominate. We are here to offer you something that we believe is better than either. Elena took a deep breath. This was the moment everything hinged on. We are here to offer you partnership, true partnership, not the kind where we submit to your rules and accept our place in your hierarchy, not the kind where we impose our will on you through force, but the kind where we work together as equals to build something better than either of us could create alone. We will share our technology, the things we have learned that you have not, the quantum resonance systems that neutralized your defenses, the communication networks that bypassed your security, the weapon systems that destroyed your fleets, all of it freely given. A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. This was not the behavior of a conquering species. In return, we ask for three things. First, acknowledgement that humanity is not a threat to be contained, but a people to be respected. Second, full integration into galactic society, not at the bottom of your hierarchy, but as equal partners in its governance. And third, a commitment to change, not just from you, but from all of us. A commitment to build a galaxy where no species fears annihilation simply because they are different. Elena fell silent, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from the highest tier of the assembly, a voice rang out. "This is unacceptable!" Elena looked up to see a massive being descending toward the central floor, a Kathrani, one of the ancient species that had helped found the Conclave millions of years ago. Its body was a mass of tentacles and sensory organs, its form constantly shifting as it expressed emotions that humans could only guess at. "You dare to attack us, destroy our fleets, threaten our existence, and then offer partnership?" the Kathrani demanded. "This is not diplomacy, it is extortion." Elena faced the creature calmly. "With respect, Ambassador, what you call extortion is exactly what your conclave has been practicing for millions of years. You threatened us with annihilation if we didn't submit to quarantine. We simply returned the favor." "We had the right," the Kathrani snarled. "We are the guardians of galactic stability. We have maintained peace for—" "You have maintained your own power for millions of years," Elena interrupted. "You have crushed any species that challenged your dominance. You have killed billions, perhaps trillions, in the name of stability. And now that you face a species you can't simply eliminate, you cry foul?" The Kathrani reared back, its tentacles lashing in fury. "You are proving exactly why you are too dangerous. This aggression, this refusal to submit." "This refusal to die quietly?" Elena asked. "Yes, that's something humans are rather known for. We don't submit to tyrants. We don't accept our own extinction. And when someone threatens to destroy everything we love, we fight back with everything we have." "Is that meant to reassure us?" the Kathrani demanded. Elena smiled slightly. "No, it's meant to explain us.
We are what we are. We cannot change our fundamental nature any more than you can change yours. But we can choose what we do with that nature, and we are choosing to offer peace." She turned away from the Kethrani, addressing the full assembly again. "I won't pretend that this transition will be easy. There are billions of beings across the galaxy who fear us, distrust us, hate us for what we've done today. That will take time to heal. Maybe generations, maybe centuries. But we are prepared to put in that time. To prove, through our actions rather than our words, that we mean what we say. To demonstrate that humanity can be trusted, not because we are harmless, but because we choose to be trustworthy. The alternative is war. Endless, destructive war that will cost both sides more than either can afford. I don't believe anyone in this chamber wants that. I certainly don't. So I ask you, all of you, to take a chance, to bet on the possibility that today's enemy can become tomorrow's friend." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembly one final time. "You declared us too dangerous. Prove us wrong. Show us that the Galactic Conclave can be better than its history. Show us that you can choose peace when war would be easier. Show us that humanity isn't the only species capable of change." Chapter 10. The New Dawn. The vote took 6 hours. Thousands of species debated, argued, threatened, and pleaded. Ancient grudges were aired. Old alliances were invoked. More than once, it seemed as though the entire process would collapse into chaos. But in the end, the result was decisive. 712 species voted for acceptance of humanity's terms. 130 voted against. The Galactic Conclave, for the first time in 9 million years, had chosen to change. In the hours and days that followed, humanity's fleet stood down. The quantum disruptors were deactivated. Communication networks were restored. Slowly, cautiously, the two sides began to talk. There were incidents, of course. Species that refused to accept the new reality. Fleets that had to be intercepted before they could attack human colonies. Terrorist cells that formed to resist what they saw as the corruption of galactic purity. But there were also moments of connection. Scientists from different species collaborating on problems that had seemed unsolvable. Diplomats discovering common ground where none had existed before. Ordinary beings reaching across the vast gulf of biology and culture to find understanding. Admiral James Chen lived to see the signing of the Treaty of Sol, the formal document that established humanity as a full member of galactic civilization. He died 3 years later, at the age of 97, surrounded by his family and a delegation of aliens who had come to pay their respects to the man who had both threatened and saved their worlds. Ambassador Elena Vasquez served as humanity's first counselor on the new Galactic Assembly, a reformed version of the old conclave that included human representation at every level. She spent the rest of her life building the bridges she had always believed in, finally able to do so without deception or ulterior motive. Colonel Joseph Kimathi returned to Earth and wrote a memoir that became required reading at every diplomatic academy in the galaxy. He never revealed the full extent of his network, but he made sure that the lessons learned were preserved for future generations. And humanity? Humanity did what it had always done. It grew. It changed. It struggled. It failed and succeeded and failed again. It made enemies and friends in equal measure. It created works of breathtaking beauty and committed acts of horrifying cruelty. It reached for the stars and sometimes fell short. But it never stopped trying.
50 years after the Battle of the Conclave, as it came to be known, a young historian named Yuki Chen, Admiral Chen's great-granddaughter, published a comprehensive study of the event and its aftermath. In it, she included an interview with one of the last surviving architects, a being so ancient that it had witnessed the birth of stars that were now dead.
"Do you regret your decision?" Yuki asked. "Accepting humanity into the conclave?" The architect was silent for a long time. Its form shifted through configurations that might have been memory, or regret, or something humans had no words for. "There was a time," it finally said, "when I believed that the purpose of existence was stability, the preservation of what is against the forces that would change it. I devoted billions of years to that purpose. I eliminated countless species that threatened it. And I believed, truly believed, that I was doing the right thing. And now? Now I understand that I was wrong, not in wanting to preserve. Preservation is natural, healthy, necessary. But in believing that preservation was enough, that stasis was superior to growth, that the avoidance of pain was worth the sacrifice of progress." The architect paused, its form taking on a configuration that Yuki had learned to associate with human smiles. "Your species taught us something that we had forgotten, that the purpose of existence is not to survive, but to live, to risk, to change, to grow. Even if that growth is painful, even if that change is terrifying, even if that risk leads to failure." "And you don't regret that lesson?" The architect's response was the last thing Yuki included in her book. "Regret is a human concept. We had to learn it from you. But no, I do not regret. I am grateful. For the first time in millions of years, I do not know what the future holds. And that uncertainty is the most wonderful thing I have ever experienced." Epilogue. 100 years later. The memorial stood at the center of New Geneva, the capital of the Terran Alliance. It was a simple structure, a pillar of black granite reaching toward the sky, surrounded by a garden of flowers from 100 different worlds. On one side of the pillar, the names of everyone who had died in the Battle of the Conclave were inscribed. Human names mostly, but also the names of aliens who had chosen to fight alongside humanity, early converts to the cause who had given their lives before the victory was won. On the other side, a single message. They called us too dangerous. They were right. Dangerous to tyranny. Dangerous to stagnation. Dangerous to anyone who believes that fear is a reason to destroy. We are humanity. We are dangerous. And we are not sorry. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, beings from across the galaxy gathered at the memorial. They came to remember what had happened, to celebrate what had been achieved, and to recommit themselves to the promise that humanity had made. This year, the ceremony was led by a young woman named Maria Okonjo Chen, the great-granddaughter of both Colonel Okonjo and Admiral Chen, whose marriage had symbolized the new unity of humanity's military and intelligence services. 100 years ago, she said, addressing the crowd, my ancestors stood at a crossroads. The galaxy had decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist. They could have accepted that judgment, could have tried to become less dangerous, less challenging, less human. Instead, they chose to embrace what they were. They proved that yes, humanity was dangerous. But they also proved that dangerous didn't mean evil, that the same qualities that made us capable of destruction also made us capable of creation, that the fire that could burn could also forge. She turned to look at the memorial, reading the names she had memorized as a child. These people died so that we could be here today. Not just humans, beings from every corner of the galaxy who believed that the old way was wrong. They gave their lives for a future they would never see, trusting that we would make it worthwhile. And we have. Not because we're perfect, we're far from perfect. We still fight, we still make mistakes, we still hurt each other in ways that would horrify our ancestors and will horrify our descendants. But we also love. We create. We reach for the stars and beyond. That is what it means to be dangerous. Not just the capacity for harm, but the capacity for change. The willingness to risk everything for a better tomorrow. The refusal to accept that things must be the way they've always been. Maria turned back to the crowd, humans and aliens alike, united in their commemoration of a day that had changed everything. 100 years ago, the galaxy declared us too dangerous. Today, we stand together as proof that they were right, and that being dangerous was exactly what the galaxy needed. She raised her hand in salute, and across New Geneva, across Earth, across the colonies, across the entire vast expanse of human civilization, billions of beings joined her. "For those who fell," she said. "For those who fell," the crowd echoed. "For those who stand. For those who stand. For those who will rise. For those who will rise." And in the sky above, where ships from 1,000 species moved in the complex dance of interstellar commerce, a single human vessel broke formation. It was an old ship, a veteran of the Battle of the Conclave, preserved as a living museum, and as it passed over the memorial, its running lights flashed in a pattern that everyone recognized. 3 short flashes. 3 long. 3 short. SOS, the ancient signal of distress, repurposed after the battle as something different. A reminder, a promise. We were in trouble. We are still here. We will always be here. The ceremony ended, and the crowds dispersed. But the memorial remained, standing silent witness to the moment when humanity had proven that being too dangerous wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be embraced. And somewhere, in the vast reaches of space, new species were evolving, new civilizations were rising, new challenges were forming. And humanity was ready. It always had been. The galaxy had called them too dangerous. Their regret had come seconds later, and humanity had made sure they never forgot the lesson.